Hello, my name is Evelyn, and I recently turned 32. I work at an international investment firm focused on foreign markets, while my husband, Brian, works in the service sector. Unfortunately, his job security is far from guaranteed, as his contract is renewed annually. The uncertainty that accompanies each renewal brings an unsettling tension, especially as the date draws nearer. Brian comes from a family that holds government positions in high regard. Both his parents worked in government roles, and his sister currently holds a government job. As a result, they view my position in the private sector with disdain, often implying that working for a company focused on profit is less respectable. To them, private sector jobs are what you settle for when you can't secure a government role, and working for a foreign company is considered a last resort. Since marrying Brian, we've been living with his family, and their open criticism of my job has only added to the strain. At one point, during a particularly anxious time regarding Brian's job security, I suggested that perhaps a permanent position in a regular company might be more stable. He quickly dismissed the idea, saying that if he couldn't be a civil servant, he'd rather not work at all. It's become clear that he hasn't even told his parents that his job is temporary, and he insists that I keep this a secret. Adding to the tension, Brian, perhaps influenced by his British upbringing, often talks about emotions he doesn't feel, creating a facade I struggle to understand. This situation leaves us navigating a maze of family expectations, job insecurity, and the pressure of maintaining a stable image for his family. He strives to appear successful in his career, yet keeps details of his finances private, rarely sharing his salary statements with me. The modest sums that go into our joint account make it hard to gauge the full picture. Curious about his earnings, I once asked him during a family gathering about his salary, especially since he's now a section manager. He replied vaguely, "You can earn so much these days." While I know my income as a bond trader is substantial, often exceeding many corporate salaries, I wasn't sure how my earnings compared to his position in the government. My mother-in-law, hearing this, seemed impressed by what I make but admitted that she couldn't gauge it against the salaries from her era. "It seems Brian is doing well," she said proudly. Brian's sister, overhearing our conversation, chimed in with a hint of sarcasm, suggesting that if Brian were in her position, he might have been a division head by now. "Government jobs do pay well, don't they?" she remarked. Brian, clearly uncomfortable, regretted bringing up the topic at all. He quickly steered the conversation elsewhere. "Let's not talk about salaries anymore. By the way, did anyone meet with the housing company representative who visited recently? Are we considering renovations for this house?" Sensing his need for a topic change, I played along and began discussing potential home improvements. As I mentioned the kitchen remodel, I was sharply interrupted by my mother-in-law. "Stay out of family matters. You're just a daughter-in-law. Keep quiet and do as you're told." Her glare was icy, and it was clear that she was always dissatisfied with anything I contributed to the conversation. The root of her dissatisfaction seems to stem from my not working in government, a prestigious occupation in her eyes. She also believes that I control all of Brian's earnings, dictating how much he can spend by giving him an allowance. In reality, Brian's salary mostly covers his personal expenses, while my income from the investment firm pays for the majority of our household costs. My sister-in-law, who also lives with us, doesn't contribute financially. She often makes comments that suggest she believes we're financially well off and don't need her help. "You're taking money from an elderly couple who only have their pension, and Brian earns a lot, so you're not struggling, right?" she says, showing no willingness to help with expenses. Living in Brian's family home saves us from the burden of rent, allowing us to manage on my salary alone, but it creates a palpable tension. After dinner, when talk of possibly working with a housing company came up, I found myself excluded. Instead, I busied myself cleaning the kitchen, while neither my mother-in-law nor my sister-in-law lifted a finger to help. I quickly fell back into my daily routine of cooking, cleaning, and laundry, tasks that never seem to end. One advantage of my job at the foreign company is that it doesn't require overtime. As long as I finish my tasks efficiently during regular hours, I can leave on time, which is a huge relief. This arrangement allows me to keep a clear boundary between work and personal life, so I don't bring job-related stress into our home, an advantage I truly appreciate. On his days off, Brian often stays busy with his computer at home. Sometimes, I wonder if it's appropriate for him to bring work home, but when I voiced my concern, he simply shrugged and said, "I can't work overtime if I don't finish on time." His response trailed off, leaving the issue unresolved and adding to the tensions we're already dealing with in our strained household. Lately, The atmosphere at home has been increasingly tense. Brian has become irritable and quick to anger, especially when I try to discuss anything with him. Recently, when I mentioned something about our housing situation, he snapped, "It's none of your business. Didn't Mom tell you that already? Just follow the rules. That's all you need to do." Despite managing both the household chores and our finances, his refusal to include me in certain discussions leaves me feeling sidelined and undervalued. One day, a representative from a home building company visited my in-laws' house. Everyone, except for me, gathered around a computer to discuss floor plans and housing designs. Curious, I approached with a cup of tea, hoping to catch a glimpse of the plans, but I was sharply rebuked with "You don't need to see this, go away." I was taken aback to discover that, instead of just renovating, they were planning to build an entirely new house. My father-in-law had mentioned wanting more space since our current home feels cramped, and it seems they are moving forward with those plans. Both of my in-laws are retired from government jobs and have accumulated a significant amount through their pensions. Since I moved in, they've been living solely on their pension, without contributing to the daily expenses, so it's likely they have substantial savings for the new construction. Choosing to distance myself from the ongoing housing discussions, I can't help but worry about what the future holds, especially concerning my sister-in-law, who is 29 and may soon decide to get married. I can't help but wonder if my sister-in-law plans to live in this new house too, which could complicate our already fragile family dynamics. Although it hasn't been explicitly discussed, I assume she will be moving into the new home. My feelings toward her are much like those I have for my mother-in-law. Neither is particularly helpful around the house, and both are quick to complain. I silently hope she'll marry soon and move out, relieving some of the tension. However, during a conversation with the homebuilder, my father-in-law revealed a surprising plan. He expressed a desire for the new house to accommodate multiple families. "Can we add another room? I want a house where my daughter and her future husband, my son, and us can all live together," he said. This was unexpected, especially since it implied that my sister-in-law's future husband might also live under the same roof. To my shock, there was no mention of the house being for Brian and me, just for Brian. It felt like I was being deliberately excluded from the plans. The proposed house is going to be large, but squeezing 4 households into the space available will undoubtedly be a challenge. While my in-laws and sister-in-law seem to be taking the lead on the project, I find myself sidelined, with no voice in the matter. Later, when the homebuilder and my family went out to visit the construction site, my mother-in-law coldly told me to stay out of it. "It's none of your business," she added, her tone spiteful. She seemed almost disappointed when I didn't respond. As the plans for the new house progressed, I found myself kept in the dark while the rest of the family prepared for the move. One day, seeing my husband seemingly disengaged, I asked, "Aren't you going to help with the move?" His response was short and irritated. "Why should I? Aren't you handling it?" I was left even more confused. Why was he angry when I was simply trying to understand our plans? I felt completely out of the loop about when and where we were moving. As the days passed, I began preparing for the move in whatever way I could, still frustrated by the lack of communication and the unspoken expectations placed upon me. As moving day approached, I packed our belongings, keeping mine separate from my husband's. My patience with my mother-in-law's hostility was wearing thin, and I couldn't help but feel suspicious of the secretive discussions my husband was having about the new house. Finally, out of necessity, I asked him, "When are we moving?" His response was dismissive. "Just get ready, you don't need to know." From snippets of overheard conversations during meal times, it became clear the move was coming soon, yet no one bothered to tell me directly. It was as if I were merely a temporary housemate, not part of the family. The truth hit me hard when the movers showed up unannounced while I was cleaning up after breakfast. My mother-in-law casually said, "Leave them. We'll buy new ones." Then, with an almost taunting tone, she added, "By the way, do you plan to move into the new house with us?" In that moment, I realized they had been deliberately excluding me from discussions about the new house and had kept the moving day a secret as part of a calculated plan to push me out. My husband, standing silently behind her, laughed along but said nothing, suggesting he was in agreement with their scheme. I had expected something like this, which is why I had packed my things separately. Now, face to face with their animosity, my mother-in-law coldly stated, "From now on, only the family will live here. Do as you wish." My sister-in-law, who looked genuinely concerned, probably thought I would beg to stay, tearfully pleading my case. But I remained calm, which seemed to frustrate my mother-in-law even more. She snapped, "Anyone who relies on someone else's earnings should leave now. Brian will build the new house and pay off the loan with his salary. We don't need a freeloader." Her words were laced with anger, but ironically, they only made me more determined to stand my ground. I had already planned to leave. When I discovered that the financial foundation for the new house relied entirely on my husband Brian's salary to pay off the mortgage, I nearly laughed out loud. It was obvious from his reaction that he had been kept in the dark. His surprise was clear as he stood there, unable to challenge his furious mother, choosing silence over confrontation. His parents seemed convinced they could preserve their retirement funds by putting the full financial burden of the new home on Brian's shoulders. This revelation solidified my decision. With a calm smile, I shared my plans. I had decided to divorce Brian. My mother-in-law's response was immediate and loud, but before she could escalate, my father-in-law and sister-in-law intervened, pulling her away and leaving Brian and me alone in the old house. Brian reluctantly gave me the new house address after I insisted that I needed it to send the divorce papers. I quickly packed my few belongings, with the help of a friend, and made the final step in separating our lives. I transferred all the utility bills into Brian's name, before heading to my parents' home for a brief respite to regroup. Once I settled, I went to the new house where Brian and his family had moved. My mother-in-law was waiting, her tone sharp and unwelcoming. Ignoring her outburst, I approached Brian, divorce papers in hand, and asked him to sign them. As we stood there in the impressive new house, my mother-in-law couldn't contain her disdain. In a mocking tone, she sneered, "Useless wife, it's because she's not a government worker. Hurry up and say it." I couldn't help but retort, "What a splendid house. Are you sure you can manage it on Brian's salary?" Her face flushed with anger, and she snapped, "You're the outsider now, so don't concern yourself with us. Take the divorce papers and leave." I paused to take in my husband's pale, shocked expression, a silent acknowledgement of how dire the situation had become. Holding the divorce papers, I left their house, my mother-in-law's furious gaze following me out. I headed straight to the town hall to submit the divorce documents, determined to close this chapter and move on. Feeling drained from the turmoil of married life, I found solace in settling into a small apartment close to my work. It was exactly what I needed, free from constant conflict and expectations of single-handedly maintaining a household. Life was much quieter and more peaceful without roommates who boasted about government employment or shirked their responsibilities. Just as I began to embrace my newfound tranquility and move on from thoughts of Brian, an unexpected call disrupted the calm. An unfamiliar number flashed on my phone, and to my surprise, it was Brian using a friend's phone. His voice cracked as he begged, "I can't pay the loan. Evelyn, will you come back to me? I can't afford the mortgage, the electricity, the water bills, or even my phone bill." Assuming he had turned to his family for help, I responded, "Your sister has a stable job, and your parents are retired with pensions. They should have some savings, right?" Dismissing his plea, I thought he would reach out to them for support. But then Brian confessed something far worse. His family's financial stability had been a facade. Their retirement savings had been wiped out in an investment scam, and his sister was drowning in credit card debt. The family that had always prided themselves on their financial prudence was now facing ruin. Their struggles had become evident after moving into the new house, which had stretched their finances to the breaking point. They reached out to me, hoping for support or perhaps a reconciliation, but I had no intention of re-engaging with them. I firmly declined, ending the conversation. Despite repeated calls, I kept my distance, letting the phone ring unanswered until they stopped trying to reach me. A while later, curiosity led me back to their neighborhood, where I was greeted by the sight of a for sale sign outside their recently acquired home. I spoke to a representative from the housing company and learned that my in-laws had sold the house shortly after moving in, unable to manage the mortgage. A relative had co-signed the loan and was now facing financial hardship because of it. This was the same family that had once boasted about their secure government jobs and looked down on those in the private sector, including a relative who had co-signed the loan. Their financial collapse and the subsequent sale of the house had strained relationships with other relatives, leading to isolation. As I sat on my sofa, the irony of it all hit me. I couldn't help but chuckle at the absurdity of their situation. Once so proud of their bureaucratic status, they now found themselves viewed as burdens by their relatives. They had become a cautionary tale of financial mismanagement and misplaced pride. Meanwhile, my quieter, more genuine lifestyle seemed to shine in contrast to their downfall.